She stood on the edge of the tarmac, eyes fixed on the row of Apaches lined up like beasts waiting for war. The heat rolled in waves off the metal, and the noise of drills rang in the distance, but she heard none of it. Her mind was on the moment. They told her nothing, had looked at her paperwork, frowned at the name, double-checked the credentials, and still shook their heads. The board had decided the Apache rotation was full and her background was too unorthodox for the seat. Her flight hours were solid, her test scores were above the threshold, but her resume was not standard, not traditional, not Safety told her to wait, to take a support role, to shadow a more experienced pilot, to learn the ropes, but she had already flown combat inserts, already pulled soldiers from hot zones, already put steel down on targets through blackout smoke. Said nothing when they passed her over again. Instead, she ran the simulator drills harder, pushed her hours higher, flew night missions with crews who trusted her without needing to ask where she had come from. Word started to spread in the hangar about the new pilot who never missed a check, who nailed the landing in a crosswind that grounded the senior officers, who could run the full start sequence from memory. Blindfolded still, the board held the line, no combat rotation for her until one day the colonel walked through the hangar, tall, broad, jaw set like iron. He was known for breaking silence with orders and ending debates with a stare. He stopped when he saw her hunched over the open panel of an Apache running diagnostics faster than the techs around her, stepped closer, asked one question about her last assignment, and she answered without looking up because she already knew. The tone of his voice meant this was not about politeness, it was about precision. Nodded and turned to leave, then paused and narrowed his eyes as the edge of her collar shifted in the breeze, revealing the ink across her neck, small, dark, clean. A unit mark most had never seen, recognized it immediately, and said nothing. Instead, he walked out, and within hours her name was posted on the active Apache rotation with a note that said confirmed, cleared for fly. The other pilots read it and said nothing because now they were curious. Now they wondered what she had done, where she had been, and what kind of unit earned that mark. Showed up the next morning before sunrise, checked her bird twice, and sat in the seat like she was born. In it, her hands steady, her eyes forward, waiting for the calic came fastened when the blades kicked up and the ground slipped away beneath her. She said nothing because flying spoke louder than any argument ever could. The call came through her headset. Crisp, direct, nothing fancy, just coordinates and altitude and a simple phrase, eyes up. She responded with a steady voice, flipped the last switch, and felt the engine hum beneath her boots. The Apache lifted from the pad with a smoothness that came from muscle memory, not luck. Crew chief in the seat behind her said nothing at first, just watched her hands, her posture, her skin pattern, like he was waiting for something to go wrong, but nothing did. She flew like she had flown before, and tighter skies over hotter zones with less time to think and more too lousy as the terrain rolled beneath them. She kept her eyes moving, tracking heat signatures, identifying ridge lines, adjusting pitch with the kind of control that only came from hours of doing it for real, not just in school, not just in drills, but under fire. They ran a route that curved through narrow canyons and wide dry flats, then pulled into a high hover where targets waited in silence like ghosts. She took in the data, wind, direction, distance, humidity, everything. The board said she was to green to manage alone. She read it in seconds, locked in, and gave the signal. Rounds hit their marks with ruthless timing. 2 bursts, 1 shift, 1 final strike. It was textbook, but not just that. It was precise, it was quiet, it was cold. In the return trip, the crew chief finally spoke, low voice over the mic, asking where she learned to fly like that, and she answered calmly, forward ops in places they don't know me. He didn't ask again. Back at base, the ground crew came out, moving slower than usual, watching as she powered down, each step clean and deliberate. She didn't speak, didn't look for approval, because she had already proven everything in the air. She walked past the line of pilots, and for the first time no one looked away, no one made a joke, no one doubted her, because the radio had already done the talking and the footage was already being passed around from screen to screen. One of the instructors had watched her approach pattern 3 times without blinking. Inside the operations tent, the colonel stood at the map table, eyes locked on the report in his hand. He didn't look up when she entered, he just tapped the paper and said it was clean to clean for a first. rotation and asked again where she came from. She gave him the name of a base that no longer existed and a unit number that was classified, but when she turned to leave, the edge of her collar shifted again and the Tata caught the lithe colonel. Didn't smile, but he nodded once and said, "Next week you fly." Leach paused at the door just long enough to let that land and then disappeared into the sun-lithe pilots who doubted her before watched her go without saying a word because they understood that the quiet ones often carried the loudest. Past days that followed were grueling, not because the missions were easier, but because the stakes were higher. Every flight was a test not only of skill but of patience and grit. The team watched her move from pilot to leader, her voice steady, commands clear and precise. She earned respect not by words but by action. They put her through scenarios designed to push limits, night sorties in simulated combat zones, rapid decision drills that left little time for hesitation, but she met each one head-on like she had faced worse, with the weight of history on her shoulders and the tattoo at her neck reminding her who she was and where she came from. The instructors tried to rattle her, calling out impossible targets, warning of dangers that others might falter on, but she adjusted every time, calculating angles, speeds, wind patterns with a mind that refused to quit. She flew into storms without complaint and emerged steady as a lighthouse. Other pilots started to change to the joke, stopped. The sideways glances turned into nods of acknowledgement. They came to her for advice, for cover fire, for insights that made missions smoother and safer. She never asked for credit, only gave what was needed. One evening, after a particularly tough drill, she sat alone under the stars, cleaning her rifle, her hands steady despite the exhaustion. The quiet was broken by footsteps, and the colonel appeared, not with orders but with a question. "Do you ever think about what it means to carry that mark?" she asked, motioning to the tattoo that wrapped around her neck like a secret. Kadesh looked up, met his gaze, and said, "Every day it reminds me of those who came before, those who didn't get to fly again, and those who trusted me to carry the mission forward." Nodded slowly and said, "Then you carry it well." At night she thought about all the places that tattoo had seen, the battles, the sacrifices, the silence of loss and the roar of survival. It was more than ink, it was a promise. Challenge was no longer just to fly the Apache, it was to honor what the Tata meant to the men and women who earned it, and to prove that she belonged in their ranks, not just in the sky but in the story. The sun was barely up when the call came through. The base was buzzing with quiet urgency, the kind that told her this was no drill, this was real, and everything they had trained for was about to be tested. She met the team at briefing, the maps laid out, the targets identified, and the stakes clear. Intelligence reported a rogue compound housing enemy assets deep in hostile territory. The mission was to infiltrate, neutralize, and extract with precision and speed. As she suited up, the familiar weight of gear and helmet settled over her shoulders, a comfort, not a burden. Her tattoo burned under the collar, a reminder of every step that had led to this moment. Flight was tense from the start. Radio chatter was heavy with updates and caution, but she remained focused, scanning the instruments, monitoring wind and altitude, calculating approach angles, and keeping the team tight. They descended low into the canyon, moving with the shadows, avoiding radar and patrols. Every second measured, every breath controlled. The team trusted her instincts, and she trusted theirs. The compound appeared ahead, small but heavily fortified. She directed the approach, slow, steady, and silent. They hit the perimeter, planting charges, disabling communications, and disabling sentries with swift precision. Suddenly, the alarms blared and chaos erupted, but she kept calm, calling out maneuvers, adjusting plans on the fly, directing the extraction route through narrow passages and dense trees. Bullets whizzed past and explosions rocked the ground, but the team moved like one living machine, coordinated and unbreakable, with her leading the way, guiding each step through danger with a steady hand and sharp ice. When they reached the extraction point, the helicopter was late a minute to slow, and that minute felt like an eternity, but she covered the team, holding position, repelling advances until the blades finally roared to life, lifting them from the fight back at base. The debrief was quick, but her report was clear, every detail noted, every success and every flaw ready to learn, ready to improve. The colonel met her afterward, a rare smile breaking his usual stoic demeanor. He said, "That was the kind of leadership that changes the course not just of a mission but of a team." She nodded quietly, knowing this was not the end but just another step in a longer journey. Despite the mission's success, whispers lingered in the shadows. Doubts about her place in the squad persisted. The old guard questioned her origins, her rapid rise, her quiet confidence. They remembered the hesitation before and wondered if it would return when it mattered most. She ignored the murmurs, focusing instead on training, pushing herself harder, flying longer, studying every detail she knew. Proving herself was a battle fought on two fronts, one in the air and one on the ground. With every skeptical glance and every whispered word, and night after hours she found herself alone in the hangar, the giant machine silent and looming around her. She ran through her checklists again and again, the tattoo on her neck tingling like a pulse, reminding her of promises made and futures earned. Her thoughts were interrupted by footsteps. A familiar voice broke the silence. It was the senior pilot, one of the harshest critics, who approached cautiously with a question. Did she really belong? Haresh met his gaze steady and said, "Not because I asked to be here, but because I earned it on every flight, on every mission, and I will keep earning it as long as it." Takeshi studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The silence between them shifted from challenge to respect. Word spread quickly. After that exchange, the team began to see not just the pilot, but the person behind the tattoo. The story behind the silence and the strength behind the calm. She became a symbol not just of skill, but of resilience, of breaking barriers and rewriting rules. With every flight, she inspired others to push past doubt and to trust in their own strength. Colonel watched quietly from a distance, proud not just of her skill, but of how she handled the storm of skepticism and rose above it unbroken. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but with every challenge she faced, she carried the tattoo like armor, a reminder that she was part of something bigger, something that demanded courage, sacrifice, and unyielding dedication. The morning sun crept slowly over the horizon, casting long shadows across the base. She arrived early. As always, her footsteps steady, echoing softly on the concrete. She ran through her pre-flight checks, the familiar hum of the Apache ready to awaken beneath her fingertips. Today was different. The mission was critical, a high-stakes extraction from hostile territory, a test not just of skill, but of trust, of leadership, of everything she had fought to prove since the first day they doubted her. The team gathered. Briefing was sharp and focused. The colonel himself gave the final nod, signaling the importance of what was to come. She looked around at the faces. Not all were convinced, but all were watching, all were counting on her. As the rotors spun up, she felt the weight of the tattoo burning against her skin, a silent promise of those who came before and those who would follow her lead. She lifted the Apache into the sky, the world falling away below, a vast expanse of earth and sky and mission. The flight was intense from the moment they crossed the border, every second packed with danger, every decision vital. The radio crackled with updates and commands. She navigated the aircraft with precision, skill, and calm, reading the terrain, weather, and enemy movements like a second nature. They reached the extraction point, the ground team already pinned down under heavy fire. She adjusted the approach, calling out maneuvers, shielding her crew with the rotor wash and the steady beat of the Bladish. Landed in a burst of dust and chaos. The team rushed aboard, no hesitation, no panic, just execution. She guided the Apache up into the sky, weaving through threats with the same grace and strength that had defined her journey back at base. The landing was rough but safe, the crew alive, and mission successful. The colonel approached her with an uncommon smile, a nod of respect, and words that held the weight of years. "You earned this," she said, simple and true. She exhaled for the first time that day, a small smile breaking through the exhaustion. The tattoo on her neck was more than ink. It was a symbol of perseverance, proof that limits were meant to be broken and that sometimes the hardest battles were the ones fought within. As she looked out over the runway, the sun now fully risen, she knew this was just the beginning, not the end of a story written in courage, steel, and determination.